Hello and welcome to Chillers and Thrillers, the paranormal podcast where I read true stories of people's encounters with the strange and unexplained. No comedy, gore, or skepticism, only 100% true spooky tales. This is the last episode of Season 2, and before we get started, I wanted to thank you all for listening and supporting the podcast. I sincerely appreciate the listens, follows, and comments. As you know, the podcast is also posted on YouTube, and I appreciate everyone who listens to me on YouTube as well, leaves comments, likes, and subscribes to the channel. This is a one-woman show, and I love seeing other spooky-minded people appreciating this. Season 3 will premiere on August 15th. In the meantime, I'll be posting some shorter stories on the YouTube channel. Also, if you're not on YouTube, I would love it if you followed me and subscribed there as well. If you're looking for more creepy and unsettling stories, then I have the podcast for you. I recently came across the Red Treehouse podcast, a twice-a-week podcast for stories of exorcisms, urban legends, cryptids, creepypastas, true crime, and more. I'm going to be posting the link in the show notes, and I also recommend you check out the Gary Sudbrick episode. Now, since this is the last episode of the season, and where I live in Canada, it's also the start of the summer break, what better theme to end this season on than true stories of people who encountered the paranormal or the supernatural while camping or spending time in the great outdoors. So turn down the lights, get comfortable, and listen in. The Logging Camp, submitted by user sutterkane. My parents and I used to visit friends who had some property in Northern California. People who lived nearby would relay stories of strange going on, sightings, noises, missing stuff. The community where our friends had their property sat on the site of what used to be several logging camps in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The stories were fairly common, but suspect on account of the people telling the tales had only caught glimpses or thought they heard something. There is also quite a bit of liquor involved. One story, however, was told to us by my parents' friends, a no BS hippie couple who were not into booze, meat, smoking, or any other kind of fun stuff. A few years before, an old friend of theirs, a photographer from the Midwest, was passing through. He was shooting pictures of abandoned mills and rusted machinery left over from the old logging days. One place he came across was tucked away in the deep woods. An abandoned cabin that housed loggers. Judging from the empty food tins and other old trash, it was guessed that the structure dated back to around 1904. Among other shots of the cabin, the guy took about a dozen front view photos. When he got home and developed his pictures, he saw in the second frontal view photo a vague figure in a hat, leaning against the inside frame of the door. He developed the next several pictures, and there was nothing in them, just an empty doorway. Then he got to the last picture. The figure was back. Only this time, it wasn't a figure. It was a face, taking up the entire picture. The face was upside down, and it was smiling. The Bell, submitted by DasLebenDer. I attended a language immersion course in northern Minnesota. It was absolutely beautiful. It looks like Bavaria threw up in the pine and birch forest. Think Epcot Disney Model Village. And there's a lot of nature. But it's very cold in the fall, and the camp is meant to accommodate up to 200 people. When I was there were about 20 at the time. It had a bit of a creepy, abandoned feel, and wolves from a nearby sanctuary area could occasionally be heard. Due to the large acreage and relatively small number of people, a bell near the dining hall was used to call us to the next activity or meal. Minnesota had just legalized edibles, practically by accident. I had a lot of knee pain from hiking the previous day, so I decided to discreetly indulge, even though that is absolutely not allowed. Mostly, they just relieve pain and make me sleepy, as the specific new law means that these products are not very strong. But I have a low tolerance and miscounted the dose. I got through dinner and the sauna trip afterwards just fine, though pretty tired. It was about 35 to 40 degrees out with the sauna in a separate building. I get done, change into thin pajamas and a sweater, and I'm still pretty warm from the sauna, so I'm not feeling the cold yet, but I am quite sleepy. I decided to lie back on the cold brick and concrete of the main plaza area just to look up at the stars, since I normally can barely see them at all. And I ended up falling asleep. I woke up, I don't know how much later, but everything hurt in a way I have never experienced before or since. I was so cold that my hands couldn't cooperate when I tried to pick up the towel I was using as a pillow. My lips were blue when I checked in the shower mirror later. But what woke me up was the camp bell going off like crazy, loud enough to wake everyone. I ran towards it worried that there was an emergency, but there were no sounds, no movements, no lights, no people, within even a quarter mile of the bell. I asked around the camp the next day, and no one had heard it ringing in the middle of the night. Contrary to popular belief, hypothermia can sit in with temperatures as high as 45 degrees, especially if one is badly dressed or altered. And there are rumors that the camp is haunted by a girl who died of cancer not long after going there by the former East Germans who were allowed to work there and teach German as a counselor. I think she rang that bell to keep me from freezing to death that night. Campsite Mimic, submitted by user TalkoSkeva. Last night was bizarre, with two strange events involving the same friend and my urgent need to use the bathroom. Around 10 p.m., I had to go, so I headed to the restrooms about a quarter mile away from our campfire. It was pitch black. As I walked, I saw one of my friends coming from a path leading to an unused site onto the main path. This path was a good 50 yards from our site's path. My friend has a very noticeable and peculiar way of walking, so I immediately knew it was him. Multiple times, he turned around and asked, "Why are you following me?" Always staying about 40 feet ahead. I replied, "I literally told you guys I was going to the bathroom," and asked, "Why did you come from a different site?" My friend picked up his pace, and I eventually lost him in the darkness. I got to the restrooms, did my business, and upon returning to our site, I asked why they were messing with me. Everyone denied my friend had even left. I figured they were just joking around. But then, at 3 a.m., I woke up again needing to use the bathroom. This time, I decided to just walk into the woods a bit. As I walked back, I heard the distinct sound of a tent zipper opening. In the darkness, I could barely see, but could definitely hear my friend zipping it back up. As I got closer, I saw him more clearly. He lit a cigarette, and I could see his face in the sparks from the lighter, and even clearer when it caught. He took a puff and said, "Can you hear me?" I replied, "Yeah, I can hear you. What's up?" He repeated much louder this time, "Can you hear me?" I said, "Yeah. Are you trying to wake everyone up?" He shook his head, then turned around and walked towards the cars, about 30 feet away. Thinking he was messing with me again, I followed but lost him behind a car. When I turned the corner, he was nowhere to be seen. Annoyed, I went back to his tent, but it was still closed, and I could hear him faintly snoring inside. I have no idea what I saw, but it looked, sounded, and walked just like my friend. He denies ever leaving his tent or walking through the woods ahead of me. The Party in the Woods, submitted by user BrooklynOatmealCooky. 2 years ago, myself and 2 other people were camping in Yellow Bottom, which is in the Cascades of Oregon. About 3 a.m., I woke up hearing what sounded like a bunch of people having a campfire party. Nothing huge, not even scary, just talking, laughing, stuff like that. I was kind of ticked off since we'd specifically come up to get away from the college kids and such, and now somebody had set up camp what sounded like less than 100 yards away. But I couldn't see fire or light through the tent walls, and since that was my big concern, fire in the woods, I just kind of ground my teeth about it and went back to sleep. About an hour later, I wake up again. This time, somebody's let a little kid start crying, and it's really annoying. Not wailing, just sniffles, that long-term crying that some kids can do. I listened for about 5 minutes, and since I'm not a monster, I've got kind of a prickly feeling that maybe there's trouble. You know, little kid crying all alone, where the heck are its parents, etc. I started to get up, and my friend, who I thought was sleeping, grabs my arms, just about giving me a heart attack, and says, "Don't go out there. Just wait." He knows the woods better than me, and he sounded really scared. So I sit and wait. And yeah, a few minutes later, the crying stops, and the party starts back up. But the weird thing is, I can't really pinpoint now what direction the party is coming from, because I was trying to tell if maybe it was a group who had found the kid and now they're all talking together, but I couldn't tell what direction it was from. The party sounds went on for about another hour, just until dawn. Then, all of a sudden, nothing. Like, cut off in the middle of a laugh, silence. I was completely freaked out by then, and I think I might have made a noise when it stopped. My friend, who hadn't even sat up the entire time, just said, "Stick Indians," then rolled over and fell back asleep. I got up when the sun was finally coming up and made coffee and kind of looked around, but I'm not brave enough like that and didn't go far. But from where I looked, there was nothing. No campfire, no tents, nothing that I could see through the trees. We packed up that day, and I asked my friend what a stick Indian was, and he wouldn't tell me. I had to come back home and Google it. And even now, I'm not sure if what's online is true or made up or what. But if you look it up, apparently it's some kind of Yakina forest spirit that lures people out by making noises like crying babies or people having a party, and then, I don't know, eats them or something. So that's my creepy thing in the woods. I don't have any proof, but people who know the Pacific Northwest, it was way up Yellow Bottom, past the official camps on the left-hand fork of the main road, down a logging road, and right by the river. The campsite with huge fallen trees over it. That's the one this happened at. Me? I've never been back up there. No, sir. The Howling, submitted by One Abominable One. This one happened when I was down in West Virginia hunting on family land between Beckley and Dawson, much closer to Dawson. We had a lot of family living there in different homes that were all in close proximity to each other, with all of them bordering land, except those that are split by Interstate 64. The building that we were staying in was built back in the 1800s, and there had been a few rooms added on over the years. A few years earlier, it had been a great place to stay since a relative was living there. 3/4 of the way to the top of the mountain and only accessible by horse or ATV. All alone, other than with his dog. Creepy fact, the family that lived in that house during the flu epidemic in 1917 died. All of them. The mountain quickly took back the home, and I could stargaze looking through the roof while laying in bed. My dad and I stayed in a sectioned-off corner of the building that had 2 old, nasty beds in it. The bed I used was situated along an interior wall and made it so that my head was against an exterior wall with a window of sorts, right next to my head. The window was an old piece of storm door glass held in place by a few bent nails, not really an exact fit for the hole it was trying to fill, but good enough to keep most of the bugs out. My dad was sideways along the other wall at my feet. An aisleway went between us to a glass storm door that led to the wraparound porch, which surrounded both exterior walls of the room and had a 4-step staircase to the yard, right at the corner leading down the path past our storm door. The storm door had a tiny deadbolt that latched behind a tiny bolt that I had screwed into the wall. You probably understand by now that I'm making the point that the building isn't exactly very tight or secure, though I have to admit that 2 of the 3 other exterior doors were actually doors, and the 4th was just another flimsy aluminum screen door. Sorry for the long intro, but I feel like it helps if you understand where I'm at when I tell the story. My dad and I had been on the other side of the mountain at his uncle's place having dinner. They played cards and drank some beverages. I relaxed after a long day of hunting by the wood-burning heater and slipped off the cold of the day. We rode the 4-wheelers back to the camp well after dark, maybe 10:30 or 11. The woods seemed off, but I don't live there, and I admit that I've had very strange feelings in these woods before that turned out fine, so I just ignored it. My dad had probably had one too many and was ready for sleep. While he was getting ready, I walked out onto the porch just outside the storm door to relieve myself. There's nobody around, so I decided to just go off the side of the porch while looking out into the long, unused mini apple orchard that had a creek running through it. While I was thinking that the place is absolutely beautiful, I heard this sound. A scream or howl, kind of mixed together. It was extremely unnerving. The sound came from down the trail, along the creek at the bottom of the mountain. As whatever it was wailed, it was obviously moving in my direction, giving an urgency to finish what I was doing. I stood there doing my business, wondering what the heck that sound was. It wasn't a wolf, or a coyote, or a bear, or a mountain lion, or anything I could think of. I remember thinking that it wasn't Cousin Bert crying because he spilled the last of his moonshine, and started to laugh to myself. But just as I did, it happened again. Except this time, it was already more than halfway up the mountain, really, really close to where I was standing, and sounded like it was heading directly towards us. It had only been a few moments. Whatever it was had covered an unbelievable amount of ground, going uphill in the pitch black of night, quicker than I could do it on an ATV. This howl lasted longer than the first one, but they both started out as a quieter yell that grows louder and more intense, then winds back down. The tone was so very creepy. Obviously, I decided that it was my priority to get my ass inside ASAP. I went in and asked my dad if he had heard it, and he asked me what. I told him I don't know what it was, but I know everything that it wasn't, and ran down a list of the obvious culprits. Making a joke, he asked me if it was Bigfoot. I laughed, and while I was explaining that I don't know what it was, something humongous ran up the stairs right outside my window and ran down past the storm door. It was so heavy that the entire place boomed and shook with the steps. We both jumped and looked towards the glass, but didn't see it go by in the dark through the glare of the light on the dirty glass. Whatever it was definitely two-legged, heavy, and fast. My dad had been through a lot in his life, and I don't think I had ever seen him scared. But when he looked at me and yelled, "You got that rifle ready?" I could see in his eyes that he was feeling the same way that I was. A real nice mix of confused, curious, and very worried. I laid there awake all night, waiting for something to yank me through that single pane of storm door glass right next to my head. Needless to say, I did get that rifle ready. For what? I don't know. I'll never know what it was, but I can tell you that it ran on two legs, and when it ran down that porch next to me, it shook the building. I'm 6'3" and 230 pounds. When I tried to duplicate the run, it didn't even come close to causing the boom and shake that my mystery encounter caused. This thing ran up a mountain, covering an unbelievable amount of ground in the time it took me to relieve myself and walk back in the door. It howled twice while still moving, clearly indicating which direction it was traveling, and it didn't seem to slow down to do it. All this in the dark, before running along the porch and continuing to only God knows where. I'll ask you, have you ever seen a predator like a wolf, coyote, mountain lion keep running while it howled? I sure haven't. The Man, submitted by user Narrator. I'm a mountain biker, and I have switched to riding the trails closest to my home exclusively at night, hence my name, Narrator. One evening, I was coming off a game trail that leads to a river's edge and onto an aqueduct trail that runs almost straight west to east for 4.5 miles. And when I rode up to the game trail onto the aqueduct, there was an old man standing with his hands on his hips, looking east down the trail. That startled me for a second because I've never seen a person that far down the trail at night, and he did not look like the hiking type the way he was dressed. He had dark pants on that were pulled up just below his chest, and a light-colored shirt tucked into them with no jacket. When I rode past him slowly, about 20 feet away, I glanced over to say hello, and when I did, I noticed that he didn't respond at all, like I was not even there. But what would raise the hair on the back of my neck was the way that he appeared. He looked lighter than the surroundings, almost like a bad Photoshop image. It was fairly dark out, but he seemed lighter than he should have. After his lack of response, and seeing that he almost looked translucent, I switched gears and cranked away fast until I got about 200 yards away to the start of a large uphill. As I was riding uphill, I looked back to see if he was chasing me, and I saw that he was not in sight on the aqueduct. I continued riding uphill till my conscience got the best of me. I started thinking that this elderly man might have wandered out of his home and forgot where he lived. Plus, it was cold out and he was not dressed for the weather temperatures that night. I also considered there was a nursing home about 7 miles down the road, and it would not be the first time someone escaped and wandered off. So I turned around to look for him and asked him if he was okay or needed assistance. I quickly rode back to the junction of the game trail where I had seen him, and he was not in sight, and I could see a great distance down the aqueduct. So I headed down the game trail to the river's edge to make sure he didn't fall in the water. And when I got to the end of the short game trail, he was not in sight. Now I was feeling less creeped out and more guilty, thinking to myself that he could be in distress and that I could have helped him. I got back on the aqueduct trail and rode full speed, about 4 miles in the opposite direction, trying to catch up to him, until I realized that there was no way he could have covered that much distance on foot in that short amount of time. So I turned around and rode back to the junction to see if I could see his footprints in the damp, sandy area he was standing, to see what direction he might have headed off to. And when I got to the spot to look, all I saw was deer, coyote, and tire tracks. No shoe prints beside mine. Needless to say, I was completely freaked out and took off riding and set a new personal record for riding that uphill section to get to my house. When I got home, the creepy feeling had passed and guilt set in again, so I gave the nursing home a call to ask if they had any patients missing, and they said no, but took my phone number and information down just in case. So I called the local PD and told them about the old lost-looking man I saw, leaving out the creepy details, of course. They said they had no calls yet, but took my number in case anything came up, but no one ever called back. It still creeps me out thinking about the way he looked that night, almost translucent. But the kicker was no footprints in the sandy mud. I'm a man of science and a prove it to me type of guy, but I did grow up in a haunted house for 18 years, and I have witnessed paranormal events in that house with family and friends. And I got the same hair-raising feeling the second I laid eyes on that old man in the woods. The very next spring, the state erected a sign with the story of the building of the aqueduct and had a picture of the crew who built that section standing in front of the pipeline before they backfilled it. And standing in front and center of the crew was one man dressed differently, not like the workers, but obviously the site foreman. And who do you think he looked exactly like? Yep, he looked and dressed exactly like the old man I saw. The way I figured it, if it was a ghost I saw, then it was him, and he was just admiring the job that he had spent so much time on and was probably very proud of. The Dread, submitted by user Carelesswhispie. It wasn't camping, but hiking, and it happened over 2-3 months in southern Illinois with my girlfriend, sister, and 2 friends who were dating. We went at night the first time, which seemed like a good idea at the time. The trail was short and within walking distance of my friend's house. So we followed this short trail out to a very secluded pond that almost nobody knows about. We were sitting on the edge of the lake, smoking and enjoying the view, when me and the other guy started to feel like we were being watched, and just uneasy. We generally have good instincts when it comes to these kinds of things. We know when it's time to get the hell out of somewhere. But our girlfriends and my sister said we were just being paranoid. Then it got cold. Fast. It was January, but the night we went, it was 60 degrees outside. It probably dropped to 40 degrees in 10 minutes, and there was this weird feeling in the air that was almost tangible. Everyone felt cold inside and out, and there was, for lack of a better word, a vibe of intense hatred around us. At this point, the girls freaked out and we hauled out of there, all the while feeling eyes on us. When we got back to the house, the temperature had returned to normal. Fast forward a month. It was a full moon and the perfect time for a night hike. The other couple wouldn't go, so my girlfriend and I went alone. We're sitting on the edge of the pond again, and she's got her head on my shoulder, when all of a sudden, I have an overwhelming sense of dread emanating from behind me. Like there's a presence there that I cannot see, and I couldn't turn around. I was so scared. I looked down at my girlfriend, and her face is cinched up, like how she does when she's afraid, and I'm about to ask her if she feels it too. But as I'm about to speak, I hear a woman's voice in my ear. She says something that I completely understand but cannot say out loud because it is the darkest, most horrible parts of me in a language that I know isn't of this world. I'm staring at my girlfriend's face, hoping it's her, but it wasn't. I start trembling and said to my girlfriend, "Remember everything you think and feel in this moment." She asked why, and I told her to just do it and we would discuss it back at the house. A few minutes later, the presence is totally gone and we start running back. As we're doing, we both felt watched and both heard branches cracking and odd noises in the woods. We finally get back and I asked my girlfriend how she felt when I told her to remember. And she said she felt so sad and cold and alone, like she wanted to die, and like we were being watched. I agreed, but was thankful she hadn't heard the woman talking like I had. So I tried to convince myself we were both just paranoid. My girlfriend and I agreed to never go back there again. Fast forward a month or two, and I have a day off and nowhere to go until my girlfriend gets out of class. And I have, at this point, tried to convince myself that we were all just paranoid and there's no way that all of this had happened. But I just can't. So I, being the curious guy that I am, go to the pond alone in the middle of the day. I sit on a different part and have no trouble. So I start walking along the edge towards the spot where everything had occurred. And as I get closer, I hear something following me in the trees, but I can't see it. I sit down and I'm scanning the trees on the opposite bank when I get the feeling again. The temperature drops by 20 degrees and cold terror fills me. I'm just looking down because I am paralyzed with terror. It was like a dream. I slowly look up just a little bit and saw the reflection of a woman dressed in black rags 6 feet away from me in the pond. As I see that god-awful apparition, I hear a blood-curdling scream from the woods behind me and I whip around. When I look back at the pond, the woman was gone. I knew I had to get the hell out of there, but that meant going through those horrible woods. I take off running and start hearing breathing, cackling, and footsteps behind me as it gets to where it feels as if it's right on top of me. I whip out my knife and turn around, and there's nothing. Nothing but cold malice in the air. And again, she speaks to me. Different words this time, but the same language. I took off, jumped in my car, and sped off. I will never go back to that place because the worst thing is the woman I saw is the same woman I have seen since I was in the 3rd grade, and I started getting recurring nightmares 3 to 4 times a year. For a little background information, my sister is an atheist and doesn't believe in paranormal things. My girlfriend and the other couple are spiritual, but up until this didn't put too much stock in ghosts or other supernatural things, and my beliefs are my own. None of us know how to explain what happened, and we all go camping, hiking, and exploring in nature all the time. This was not random chance or an animal. This was something else. I know not many people will believe me, but there has been 0 embellishments to this story. The Visitor, submitted by user Brown_Topher. I'm not quite sure what to classify this as. People I've spoken with about this experience have theories that it could be anything from a lucid dream to the bizarre and supernatural. My in-laws annually rent a cottage in the summer for the whole family to come together. My wife is from a family of 3 boys and a girl, and most everyone is married with kids. Needless to say, the cottages are typically quite large, and even then, things get cozy. That said, it was just another night in a new place. The bedroom we had faced the front of the house and was right above the porch. It was one of those structures where the steep slant of the roof affect the upper rooms, and we were right under the steeple. It's well after midnight, and everyone is settling down for bed. I think my wife had dozed off an hour or so prior, and I was left to my own devices. I was feeling tired, and after reading, decided to tuck in for the night. Lights out, book down, good night. Here's where things get a bit odd. A handful of hours later, likely between 3 a.m. to 4 a.m., I woke up with a start. Not entirely unnatural, as I fall into either a featherlight sleep or the type of sleep that could survive a tornado. Across from me, tucked in just under the lowest part of the roof slant, is a large man. Now, my youngest brother-in-law stands at 6'4" and is a heavy-set dude. At a glance, this is who I thought was standing in the room. I sit up in bed and look at him. Confused, I asked, "Andy, what are you doing here?" The longer I look at the person, the more I realize it couldn't possibly be my brother-in-law. Forget the creep factor of it. If it was him, that would be a completely different story. The reasons I concluded that this was not him were as follows. The angle of the roof appeared to intersect with the upper torso of the figure, yet I somehow felt as if I could perceive the entire figure. It was like looking at a really trippy optical illusion. I could see the full person, but my brain, also in some way, identified that it was impossible to visualize someone as large as I thought I was seeing, when the only clearance at that portion of the room offered was 4 feet max. The second reason was that the clothing was off. The face was heavily bearded, and, well, it looked like it was decaying. The second I became aware of this, I felt a wave of incredible terror washing over me. I swear to whatever God you do or do not believe in, that this thing turned towards me in what seemed like slow motion, and then faster than I could perceive, it was right next to the bed. I remember nothing more of the night after that. My mother-in-law, a true-blooded Hungarian who I often jest is a gypsy, is sitting across from me having breakfast the next morning. She looks at me and quietly asks, "What can you tell me about your visitor last night?" I have no words. I eventually told her what little I remembered, and she just smiled and nodded. She originally asked me about the visitor because she saw the visitor too. She has worse eyesight than me, and what she describes to me is more of a vague silhouette than what I saw. Apparently, shortly after seeing this, she heard me speaking in my room. Her gut feeling was that I saw what she saw. Nightmare experience at my friend's cabin, submitted by user mhop99. My story involves myself and 3 of my really good friends throughout my whole childhood. I'll refer to them by Kevin, Ryan, and Tommy, who I am still good friends with to this day. I could not write this story without their help, consent, and experiences as well. The story you're about to read is true and not made up in any way. Regardless whether we had been seeing things or not, the reality is we had experienced something horrifying one night at my friend Kevin's cabin. We thought long and hard about actually sharing it or not, afraid of being ridiculed, but we are ready to share with the community. And again, you had to be there to experience it. One of my friends actually suffered a nervous breakdown after the incident and needed counseling, Regardless, I would like you to know also that I have been a skeptic of the paranormal and find it very hard to believe in many aspects. But I love to watch, listen, and read it simply because I always love to have an open mind in life. An open mind, in my opinion, is a growing one. Whether this was paranormal or not, something was clearly there that night. Now, on to the story. During the midsummer, me and a couple of my good friends always made time to go up to one of my friends' family cabin way up north in the forests of Minnesota. This cabin is located on Vermilion Lake. Throughout all of our young years, we would always go, accompanied by my friend's dad, who owned the cabin, and sometimes a few of our dads as well. Once we were juniors in high school, we felt mature and old enough to go to the cabin on our own without Kevin's dad or any other adult supervision that may have accompanied us. My friend's cabin is very remote and very little. It's based upon a very large-sized island. Other cabins were on the island, but the next one closest to us was a solid quarter or half-mile away at least, which you would get to by taking a man-made path around the island. And I want to mention that to get to my friend's cabin, you had to park on a gravel road on the opposite side of the island, as his cabin was on an island, and then you had to take his boat across the lake about a half-mile to reach the cabin. My mind always had a tendency to run around when sleeping there at night, throughout all my years, for it was all one level with only 2 bedrooms next to one another, a kitchen living room connected, and a bathroom in the back of the cabin. And where you slept in the cabin was always at least one window in each room, with no curtain, so it was very easy to see outside to the woods and lake, and this is where my mind would run, as I always thought someone was peering in. Of course, nobody was. I had only been to this cabin a dozen times throughout my lifespan, and nothing had ever happened. And the older I got, the easier it was to sleep. Now for the event. We would usually stay a week's worth, or 4 to 5 nights. On the 3rd night during this trip, when we were there on our own, finally, we had set up a campfire and had been drinking beer all night. I don't condone underage drinking, by the way. We just happened to sneak some, being the rebels that we were. We went out to the dock to gaze upon the magnificence of the stars and enjoy our buzz, when all of a sudden we heard something out at the water that sounded like a fish jumping. We quickly looked out at the lake with curiosity, wondering where the splash came. Thankfully, the moon was out that night, which helped light up the lake. Otherwise, it would be dark as black, with there being no city lights for miles upon miles, and we would not have been able to see anything on the lake. My friend Ryan began to point something out in the middle of the lake, saying, what the hell is that? After looking closely and finally spotting what he was pointing at, all I can describe it is that it simply looked like a head out in the middle of the lake, just floating, staring at us directly. It was about 3/4 worth of a football field length out in the lake from the dock. There was no question that I could see its features. It had long black hair and very pale skin, like a face, but I couldn't make out the eyes, mouth, nose, or chin. It was as if it was just a blob of pale skin with long black hair over it. I'll never forget the feeling that came over me. The hairs on my legs, neck, and arm all stood up, and I was paralyzed on the inside, ready to leave that moment. But we told ourselves it was just a loon, as these birds are very popular night drifters on the lake and do their hunting late. They also have black and white colors on their coats and hunt by diving deep into the water, holding their breath up to minutes sometimes. So it was possible that a loon, all of a sudden, popped up in the water after hunting a bit. Or at least we tried to talk ourselves into that scenario. All of us were having the creeps and noticing that this thing wasn't moving one bit, just treading water in its same place. We went back to our campfire, lit it even brighter, and headed inside to drink some more. I'd like to mention that there was a staircase outside my friend's cabin, about 8 stairs in length down to the bottom where the fire pit and dock was. We soon forgot about the head with the help of beer, until I had to use the bathroom really badly and the one inside was preoccupied. I just went outside to do my business, since we were in the great outdoors. When I was in the middle of my business and glancing out at the beautiful moonlit lake, I noticed that the black circle object was still there, but about 30 yards closer now. Still looking as if it was staring right at me. I could easily see the nose on this thing's face. Again, it was very pale, like it hadn't seen the sun for years. And a very, very uneasy feeling came over me, and I immediately went inside and told my other friends to come look, quick, keeping my eyes glued to it at the door of the cabin. We came outside to see it still there, looking at us, as if this head was corked up at us with its chin in the air. Nobody dared go down that dock anymore, and we immediately went back inside, ruling out that it probably wasn't a loon, because a loon couldn't have tread water in the same spot. Eventually, the current would have drifted it somewhere else in a rocking manner. For a loon to stay in the same spot for almost an hour or two made no sense to any of us. This head-like object was stiff as a board, and not moving a single muscle, just staring up at us from the deck inside. There was no ripple effect at all in the lake from the object. We convinced ourselves it was just a log and went back in. I could tell everyone else felt uneasy too. A few hours would pass. It was super late into the night at this point and knew we needed sleep. Being my curious self, I looked back outside once more, and the black object had completely vanished. I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, thinking the log must have floated off or just hit shore somewhere. As we slept with the windows open that night, there was no AC in this cabin and we had to open them or we would fry, with it being the middle of the summer. Me and my other friend Tommy slept in the living room with my 2 friends sleeping in 2 separate bedrooms with their doors open. Not being able to sleep, but keeping my eyes peeled shut, I began to hear someone walking around at the bottom of the stairs to the cabin, around where the campfire was. I was scared stiff. No question what or whoever I heard down there was on the dock now, pacing back and forth as it made the sound of a boot clicking on the wood. It was as if they weren't sure what to do with themselves, and that lasted for about 3 minutes. I wanted to whisper to my buddy, but was frozen in fear. I just kept my eyes shut and ears on full alert. The footsteps sounded like they took 2 steps up the deck stairs all of a sudden, but then turned around and sounded like they were sprinting out down the man-made path. After it sounded like the steps were long gone and a couple of minutes had passed, I woke up Tommy asking if he heard the steps, both of us sitting up. I was startled to see my friend Ryan walking out of his room and saying, "We need to leave," a minute after these steps vanished. He must have heard us talking, so felt that he could come out as well, but either way, he was waking us up regardless. Something was very disturbing about his expression, and I asked him why. He woke up my friend Kevin in the other room and said, "Let's go Get to the boat. It's time to go." Asking him what was happening and why, he explained to us quickly while grabbing his stuff. And I'll never forget what he said. He said when he was turning sideways on his bed to get more comfortable, he saw someone peeking in at the top right corner of his window, and it quickly shifted out of his view. He said all he saw was one eye, ghostly white skin, and black, long hair down the window. Another thing I'd like to add is when we looked back at what he experienced, it chills us to the bone to realize that since this face was in the top right corner of the window in my friend's room, this thing was either damn near 8 feet tall, standing on something like bricks trying to peek in, or was floating. Ryan then continued to say, "Let's go," very seriously. Absolutely disturbed out of my mind and feeling like I was going to be sick, I told them what I had heard in the living room when I was trying to sleep, and we all agreed and packed our stuff and booked it, not cleaning the cabin or anything. We locked up, and as we headed down the stairs, we saw barefoot prints in the dirt, heading off into the path and all around the cabin. We picked up our step, getting to the boat, not knowing what was watching us or around us, threw our stuff on the boat, untied it, and sped off. I don't even think about the head in the water anymore or to look at the water, thank God. My eyes were just glued to the island, trying to spot anything moving, but I saw nothing. When we had finally gotten our stuff packed in the car and the boat tied up, we took off. We had been driving for about 10 miles, and out of the blue, Ryan broke down in the car sobbing. What was it, guys? What did I see? We called to tell our parents what had happened on the way back and that Ryan was freaking out. They told us to just get home safely and quickly. It was late, about 4 or 5 in the morning, but no one slept, and it was a very quiet ride home. Kevin's dad went up that following weekend and said he experienced nothing while there, but did mention the bare footprints were still lingering about, which he thought was odd because someone was walking around his property, which bugged him badly. I, to this day, cannot explain what happened and why it seemed to have happened to us. I can't explain what we saw in the lake and what Ryan specifically saw. Nothing has ever happened at that cabin since that night, or so we've been told by Kevin's dad, who still owns it. Tommy and Kevin both have gone back and been fine, but Ryan refuses to go back, and I'm with him. A lot of people have cabins on this island, so it could have been a prank in the making that had been busted when Ryan saw the person at the window. Or the person possibly wanted to do something worse than scare us. I'll never be able to explain what was floating in the lake. But the fact that this incident, along with bare feet and someone looking in at Ryan at night at the upper right corner of the window, seems like more than just a coincidence. And that's all for this episode. Thank you all again for tuning into the podcast this season, and I hope you stick around for season 3. If it's summer where you're living, I hope you have a great summer. I'll see you all on August 15th. And in the meantime, please feel free to check out the YouTube channel for shorter videos with true stories of people's encounters with the strange and unexplained. I hope all you ghouls and ghosts stay safe, and I'll see you again soon.